Hey friends, it's Mrs. Bailey, and today we are going to be reading about the first Americans. They're also called Native Americans, and I'm sure that you've heard that term. Do you know what native means? It means first, original, born there, something like that. So as always, I'm going to ask you to follow along, and every now and then I'll put my cursor down like this, so in case you're lost, you can catch right back up. Let's get started. Native Americans, also known as American Indians, Indigenous Americans, and First Americans, are all recognized as the indigenous peoples of the United States. Similar terms may be used to describe them in Canada, Mexico, South America, and other areas, but in this text, we'll mainly be referring to the Native Americans of the United States. That word indigenous, that means existing in a land from the earliest times or before the arrival of colonists. So, before the arrival of the Europeans. Thousands of years before European explorers arrived in the Americas, it's estimated there were already 50 million indigenous people or Native Americans living there. About 30 million of those people were living in South America, while around 10 million were living in the United States. So the Americas are both North America and South America. And it says there were 30 million indigenous people already living in South America before European settlers came over here. And 10 million were living in the United States, which is on North America. And please note that Alaska is part of the United States, even though it's up here beside Canada. Alaska is a long way from mainland United States, but it's a part of the United States. I say that for a reason. We're going to be looking at that in just a minute. These Native Americans are believed to have moved across a land bridge that formed during the last ice age and connected Siberia to Alaska. Siberia is a part of Russia in northern Asia. The land bridge was exposed when glaciers formed, lowering the sea level by about 300 feet, basically allowing people and animals to walk across the ocean floor from Asia into Alaska. It's thought that many of the people were simply following the animals they hunted. As the animals moved, the people moved. They then began moving southward into the mainland United States. Sorry about all those mess ups. So, Russia right here, it's a part of Europe and Asia. But this right here is a part of Asia, Russia. Siberia is a territory in Russia. Right here is Alaska. Remember, way far up from the mainland United States. Right here is where that land bridge is that they were talking about. There's only a tiny little bit of land or a tiny little bit of distance separating Asia and North America, or Russia and Alaska. And during the last ice age, the glaciers helped lower the water level, basically exposing the seafloor. So what this is saying is that people from Russia walked across the seafloor to get into Alaska, but the seafloor was exposed, so it was basically a land bridge. The first groups of people or tribes were hunter-gatherers, meaning they had a nomadic lifestyle, moving from place to place in search of food. So nomads are people who move around in search of food. They just go from place to place. They don't stay settled. They would hunt, fish, and harvest wild food in the area they settled, hence their name, hunter-gatherers. But when the area was depleted of resources, they would pick up and move in search of a new area with new resources. And this word resources is basically talking about fishing, hunting just the animals, the fish that you would find in an area. After they've lived there for a little while, they've sort of killed off a lot of the animals, used a lot of the resources there. Or animals realized they were there and they didn't go to that area. Fish would go to different areas. So once they had depleted their resources in an area, they would pick up their stuff, leave, and go to another place. Nomads, a nomadic lifestyle. Not all tribes continued with the nomadic lifestyle, though, such as the Pueblo Indians of the Southwest, who chose to settle down and farm for their food. They were still proficient hunters, but also greatly depended on agriculture to sustain their lifestyle. Their most important crops were corn, beans, and squash. Being that they weren't a nomadic tribe, their homes were permanent and, like their tribe name, called Pueblos. So they began, I believe they all began as nomadic tribes, but these particular Native Americans, the Pueblo Indians, settled down fairly quickly. And once they settled, they stayed there. So they didn't continue being a nomadic tribe. And they lived in pueblos, which looks kind of like this. And it says pueblos is a settlement that had dwellings made of stone, adobe, and wood. So they were these like flat-topped dwellings, and a lot of different families could live there. As you can see, this is huge. So all kinds of different families would live in these settlements. Many Pueblo Indians even lived in pueblos they built in the side of cliffs. And in fact, one can still visit some of these cliff dwellings today. While there, you may even be able to see the petroglyphs and pictographs on the rock walls. So this right here, this particular cliff dwelling is in Colorado. I believe Colorado Springs or somewhere around there. And I took this picture because my family and I went there a few years ago and we visited these cliff dwellings, and they're really neat. They're pretty advanced, I thought, for thousands of years ago. You could go in, there's different rooms, there's a different place for like a fire pit. They're really cool. So if you're ever out that way, I would definitely suggest going to visit them. So this word petroglyph, that's a written language carved into an exposed rock surface. And pictographs is a written language painted onto a surface. So the Native Americans, hundreds and or thousands of years ago, they didn't have a written language. So they used pictures that they would write on the wall or carve into the stone walls. They had oral language that they spoke to each other, and they also told stories where you hear the myths and folk tales from. A lot of those are from the Native Americans. But their written language was petroglyphs or pictographs. And over here it shows an example. It's sort of a crude example because this is what I did. My person doesn't look near like what their people do. But if I were going to write this message on the wall of a cliff or on some type of animal hide, it says, "The boy traveled across mountains and through forest day and night until he found food." I might use some of these types of drawings. So this looks like the boy, and I'm saying that this arrow is traveled, and we have mountains and forests. The sun represents day, the moon and stars represents night, and the fish and the deer represent food, the animals. Now, let me show you how just changing this one thing up. If I decided to say the boy traveled across mountains and through forests day and night in search of food, then I might want to put like a little eyeball right here. Let's see if I can make an eyeball. Okay, looks kind of like an eye. Anyway, so you can change it up just a little by the pictures that you drew. So some of their future generations of Native Americans, if they saw this on the wall, they would realize kind of what it said. Maybe not exactly, but a little bit. Some of the other types of homes that Native Americans lived in were teepees, wigwams, longhouses, and igloos. Many of the nomadic tribes of the Great Plains lived in teepees because they could be easily moved from place to place. They were perfect for the Plains Indians as they were always on the move, following the buffalo herds. Why do you think they were following the buffalo herds? Maybe to get their hides to wrap their teepees in or to use for coats. They were durable and versatile, providing warmth in the winter and shade in the summer. Teepees were built with poles and animal hide. The poles were tied together at the top and spread out at the bottom, similar to a funnel or cone shape, then wrapped in animal hide, usually buffalo hide. So there's one reason right there. And also, Native Americans would use the hides of animals to keep warm. Wigwams were semi-permanent dwellings that had wooden frames and were covered with woven mats and birch bark. Wigwams were usually more curved, while teepees had a pointed top. The Algonquian Indians in the woodland regions lived in wigwams. They weren't very large, but they were able to withstand harsh temperatures and volatile weather conditions. So it says wigwams were semi-permanent. And teepees were more, you could move them. They weren't permanent. What do you think maybe the differences are? Well, for one, with a teepee, they used limbs, branches as their poles, and they wrapped it in animal hide. Well, they can take that animal hide off and they can fold it and take it with them. A wigwam is covered in woven mats and birch bark. You wouldn't really be able to fold that up and take that with you. Also, wigwams were mainly used in the woodland regions, and so they're going through a lot of woods, hence the name. And it's hard to take those big poles and travel with them when you've got trees and stuff around you, whereas if you're in the Great Plains region with teepees, it's just flat. There's no trees, you've got open range. So having those poles with you and getting through there is easy because it's not snagging on anything. So that's kind of one reason I think that they may have been semi-permanent. The Iroquois people in the northeastern United States and eastern Canada lived in longhouses. Longhouses were permanent structures built from wood and bark, and they get their name due to their long rectangular shape. They were much larger than wigwams. As many as 20 families could live in one longhouse. Doors were put at each end and fireplaces interspersed down the center for warmth. Holes were placed above the hearth to let out smoke. So this particular longhouse right here is a reproduction, something that they made for people to visit and see what longhouses look like. I don't see a door on this end, but there may be one there. It's just that I can't see it because the bark or whatever it's covered in is just kind of long. But what they're saying is that there's a door on each end. There's one at this end, and there's one down here at this end. This longhouse is large, but it's not as large as they can get. And I read that when they're really large, they even might have doors on the side here. And I only see one chimney in this longhouse, but if it was longer, then they probably would put chimneys interspersed down the center, just to keep different families, no matter where they are, warm. So you might have grandmas, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all kinds of people living in one longhouse, as much as 20 families, they said. The Inuit people of Alaska, aka Eskimo, often lived in igloos. The inside temperature of an igloo could be anywhere from 20 to 70 degrees warmer than the outside temperature. So, if the outside temperature is negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, the inside could be positive 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, 30 degrees is still cold. It's actually a little below freezing. But it's a lot warmer than if you were outside the igloo. This is what an igloo looks like, and I'm sure that all of you have heard of igloos. It says igloos were constructed by forcing together bricks of snow to create a dome-like structure. So if it's made out of snow, how do you think the people stayed warm inside? I mean, there are a couple of different ways that structure could help you stay warm. I'm not going to talk too much about it because for those of you who are in a classroom and who have the worksheets that go along with this, it's sort of a think about for you to think about and draw your own conclusion. But I did read where in some igloos you could even have a fire. So long as you put the fire in the center where it's farthest away from the edges and you put a little hole at the top so the smoke could go through, you could even have a fire in an igloo without melting it. So that's pretty cool. Today, most Native Americans live and work anywhere in the United States, leaving their reservations for educational and employment opportunities. Makes sense. While there are far fewer Indian reservations or settlements today, there are still about 325 Indian land settlements administered as federal Indian reservations, with the largest being the 16 million acre Navajo Nation reservation in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. So the states, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, they all sort of have a corner that they are. Let's see, this is a crude drawing. And so it looks like this Navajo Nation reservation is probably in these three right here, and it's the largest in the United States. And I use the term Indian because when I was doing my research, they still say Indian reservations, even though we've sort of started using the word Native Americans to represent them rather than Indian. But I was just using what my research told me to use. And right here, this is Monument Valley in the Navajo Nation. I am sure that you've probably seen the pictures of this geographical area before. So now you know where it's at and what it's called. And over here it says, "Welcome to the Navajo Nation." If you get a chance to visit some of the Native American sites in the United States, then take it. Most reservations welcome visitors and are eager to share historical and cultural traditions with people. In order to fully understand your place in the world today, then it seems only right to understand, honor, and respect your country's past, no matter where you're from. Wouldn't you agree with that? To know where you are today and where you're going tomorrow, you kind of need to know about your past. And right here, this is a picture of my son up at the top here. And he's at the Cherokee Indian Reservation in North Carolina. Native Americans have a reservation up in North Carolina where they're open to the public and they want you to come in and see about their culture. And this right here is a very nice cabin that was built. And this is my son and his friend inside the cabin. Over here we see some arrowheads that they're displaying. And you know, I had a student a few years ago who her dad was excavating a place across the line, the Florida-Georgia line, and he found hundreds of arrowheads. And he gave me a couple, which is pretty cool, and I would use them in my social studies lessons. But they made these arrowheads, and they used them for protection and for killing animals for their food. And that right there, that almost looks like my display that I had. And there are a few of them right there. Down here, this is just a picture of a couple of the Native Americans, I am assuming Cherokee, that were working on site. I blurred their faces out because they do not know I'm using this picture. And I didn't want to put them out there for all to see if they didn't want to be seen. But they work and they do things and they talk to you about their culture when you're there. So if you ever get a chance to go to a Native American reservation, I would jump on it, especially if you're here from the United States. It doesn't matter, even if you're not. It's great history. It's very informative and interesting to find out about our past. So I hope you had a good time, and I hope you enjoyed reading this with me and learned a few things. I did when I was researching it. And until next time, I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.